The rain fell like judgment on the city streets, each drop carrying with it the weight of 1,000 broken promises. Marcus Williams pressed his back against the cold brick wall of the subway entrance, watching the river of humanity flow past him in their designer umbrellas and expensive coats. Nobody looked down. Nobody ever looked down. 17 years old and already invisible to the world that mattered, Marcus understood the cruel mathematics of urban indifference. He clutched the crumpled paper in his jacket pocket. Another job interview. Another chance to escape the grinding poverty that had swallowed his family whole since his father's flag-draped coffin came home from Afghanistan 3 years ago. The McDonald's manager had said 3:30 sharp. It was already 3:40. Marcus pushed through the crowd, his worn sneakers splashing through puddles that reflected the neon promises of a city that had never kept its word to people like him. The rain had turned vicious now, driving sideways across the concrete canyon of Fifth Avenue, and the well-dressed masses moved faster, their urgency infectious. That's when he saw her. She sat on the metal bench like a discarded piece of the city's conscience, her silver hair plastered to her skull by the relentless downpour. Her clothes, once probably expensive, hung from her thin frame in soggy tatters. Designer shoes, now cracked and waterlogged, suggested a fall from grace that had been both swift and merciless. "Help," she called out, her voice barely audible above the urban symphony of car horns and rushing footsteps. "Please, someone help me." A businessman in a $3,000 suit swerved around her without breaking stride, his phone pressed to his ear like a lifeline to a world where old women didn't exist on park benches. A group of college students laughed as they passed, their conversation about weekend plans drowning out her pleas. Even the street vendor who sold overpriced hot dogs 30 feet away had positioned himself so his back was turned to her suffering. Marcus stopped. Something about her reminded him of his grandmother, not the way she looked, but the way she held herself. Defeated but defiant. Broken but still fighting. His grandmother had that same look when she counted pills at the kitchen table, rationing her heart medication because they couldn't afford to fill the prescription every month. "Ma'am?" Marcus approached slowly, the way his father had taught him to approach wounded animals. "Are you all right?" The woman's head snapped up, and Marcus felt his breath catch. Her eyes were the color of steel and just as sharp, but there was something else there, a flicker of intelligence that seemed at odds with her current circumstances. These weren't the eyes of someone lost to addiction or mental illness. These were the eyes of someone who had seen too much and remembered everything. "You can see me," she whispered, and there was wonder in her voice, as if Marcus had just performed a miracle. "Of course I can see you." Marcus glanced around at the passing crowd, bewildered. "Why wouldn't I be able to see you?" She studied his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, as if she were memorizing every detail. "Most people can't anymore. They look right through me, like I'm already dead." A security guard from the nearby department store had noticed their interaction and was making his way over, his hand resting on the radio at his belt. Marcus had seen that look before, the one that said trouble was about to be someone else's problem. "Listen, we need to get you out of this rain," Marcus said quickly. "Is there somewhere I can take you? Family? A shelter?" The woman's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Family." She shook her head. "My family thinks I'm dead, child. And maybe that's for the best." The security guard was 10 feet away now, his expression promising nothing good for either of them. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He extended his hand to the old woman. "Come with me." She stared at his outstretched palm for what felt like an eternity. Then, with movements that spoke of a lifetime of elegant gestures reduced to desperate necessity, she reached out and took his hand. The moment their skin touched, Marcus felt it, a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with the storm raging overhead. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her fingers long and elegant despite the grime beneath her nails. But it was what she said next that made his blood run cold. "They're watching me," she whispered, her voice urgent and low. "They think I'm dead, but they're still watching. They know I didn't die in that plane crash, and they can't let me live to tell anyone the truth." Marcus followed her gaze across the busy street, and his heart nearly stopped. A black SUV with tinted windows had pulled up to the curb, its engine idling like a predator waiting to strike. As he watched, two men in dark suits emerged from the vehicle, their movements coordinated and purposeful. They began scanning the crowd with the methodical efficiency of professionals. "Don't look directly at them," the woman hissed, tightening her grip on his hand. "If they see you helping me, you'll become a target too." "A target for what?" Marcus whispered back, but even as he asked the question, one of the suited men turned in their direction. Their eyes met across the river of people, and Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. The man reached inside his jacket. "Run," the woman said simply. They moved together through the crowd, the old woman's grip on his hand never wavering despite her apparent frailty. Marcus's mind raced as they wove between umbrellas and shopping bags. Who was this woman? What plane crash was she talking about? And why did those men look like they'd stepped out of a government thriller? Behind them, he could hear shouting, harsh voices cutting through the ambient noise of the city like knives. The suited men were pushing through the crowd now, no longer concerned with subtlety. "This way," the woman gasped, pulling him toward the subway entrance. Her breath came in short puffs, but her eyes remained sharp and calculating. "I know these streets better than they do. I've been running longer than they've been hunting." As they descended into the underground maze of tunnels and platforms, Marcus caught a glimpse of the woman's profile in the fluorescent lighting. Despite the grime and exhaustion, despite the tattered clothes and desperate circumstances, there was something regal about her bearing. Something that spoke of power and authority temporarily laid low. "What's your name?" he asked as they boarded the first train that arrived, not caring about its destination. She was quiet for so long that he thought she hadn't heard him. Then, as the train pulled away from the station and into the darkness of the tunnel, she turned to face him fully. In the harsh light of the subway car, he could see that her eyes were filled with a sadness so profound it seemed to have weight. "My name," she said slowly, as if testing the words, "is Rose Blackwood. And 3 months ago, according to every news outlet in the world, I died in a private jet crash over the Atlantic Ocean." The train thundered through the darkness, carrying them away from the hunters and toward a truth that Marcus was only beginning to understand. Outside the windows, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white, and somewhere in that kaleidoscope of illumination, a 17-year-old boy's ordinary life transformed into something extraordinary. Something dangerous. Something that would either save them both or destroy everything he'd ever known. The last thing Marcus saw before the train plunged into the deepest part of the tunnel was his own reflection in the window, sitting next to a dead billionaire who was very much alive. And in that reflection, he looked exactly like his father. If you are enjoying this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 2. The subway car rattled through the darkness like a coffin on wheels, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just stepped into a story that had been written long before he was born. Rose Blackwood sat beside him in silence, her eyes fixed on the reflection in the window as if she were watching for ghosts. 23 minutes later, they emerged from the Bronx station into a neighborhood where hope came secondhand and dreams were sold by the piece at pawn shops. This was Marcus's world, a place where billionaires didn't exist except on television screens in check-cashing stores. "This is where you live?" Rose asked, and there was something in her voice that Marcus couldn't identify. Not judgment, exactly. More like recognition. 3 blocks up. Marcus glanced over his shoulder, searching for black SUVs in a landscape of rusted sedans and delivery trucks. "My grandmother's place. It's not much, but it's safe." Rose nodded slowly, as if she already knew what "not much" looked like in this zip code. As they walked, Marcus noticed she moved differently now, less like a lost old woman and more like someone who understood how to become invisible in plain sight. She kept to the shadows between streetlights, avoided the security cameras mounted on corner stores, and seemed to know exactly which alleys offered the best escape routes. "How long have you been running?" Marcus asked. "Longer than you've been alive, in one way or another." Rose pulled her tattered coat tighter around her shoulders. "But these past 3 months, that's been different. That's been survival." The apartment building where Marcus lived with his grandmother was a testament to urban decay, 5 stories of crumbling brick and broken promises, held together by rent control and the stubborn refusal of its residents to give up. Marcus led Rose up 3 flights of stairs that groaned under their weight, past doors marked with the evidence of lives lived on the margins, cooking smells that spoke of home countries left behind, children's voices raised in languages that would never appear on standardized tests, and the blue glow of television sets offering dreams for the price of electricity. "Graham?" Marcus called out as he inserted his key into the triple-locked door of 3B. "I'm home. I brought someone who needs help." The door opened before he could turn the key fully, revealing Dorothy Williams in her faded housecoat and the kind of slippers that had seen better decades. At 68, she still had the posture of the factory worker she'd been for 40 years, but her dark skin had taken on the gray undertones that spoke of a heart working too hard with too little help. "Marcus, baby, you're soaked through." Dorothy's eyes moved past her grandson to the woman standing in the hallway, and Marcus saw something flicker across his grandmother's features. Surprise, perhaps. Or was it something else? "This is Rose," Marcus said quickly. She was caught in the storm, and some men were following her. She needed somewhere safe. Dorothy studied Rose with the careful assessment of a woman who had learned to read people like weather patterns, a skill necessary for survival in a world that didn't offer second chances to people like them. "Rose," Dorothy repeated, and the name seemed to hang in the air between them like a question that hadn't been asked yet. "Mrs. Williams." Rose stepped forward, and suddenly her voice carried the kind of authority that Marcus had only heard in movies about powerful people. "Thank you for taking me in. I know this is an imposition." Marcus felt his world tilt slightly off its axis. He hadn't told Rose his grandmother's name. "How do you?" Marcus started to ask, but Dorothy was already stepping aside, ushering them into the apartment. "Come in, both of you. You'll catch your death standing in that hallway." The apartment was exactly what Marcus had expected Rose to see, worn furniture arranged with the kind of care that made poverty look like a choice rather than a circumstance, photographs of better times arranged on surfaces that had been polished until they gleamed, and the persistent smell of the lemon cleaning solution that Dorothy used to maintain dignity in a place that fought against it every day. Rose moved through the space like she was cataloging every detail, her sharp eyes taking in the pill organizer on the kitchen counter, the stack of unpaid medical bills held down by a ceramic elephant that had been a Mother's Day gift from Marcus years ago, and the photograph of Marcus's father in his army dress uniform that held the place of honor on the mantelpiece. "Sergeant Daniel Williams," Rose said softly, approaching the photograph. "He was a good soldier. A better man." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You knew my son?" Dorothy's voice had taken on an edge that Marcus had never heard before, a combination of hope and suspicion that made his stomach twist. Rose touched the glass covering Daniel's photograph with reverence. "I knew him well. He saved my life more than once." Marcus sank into the couch that had been old when he was young, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. "You knew my father? But he died in Afghanistan. He was deployed with the 82nd Airborne." "Yes," Rose said simply. "He was also my head of security." The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire, visible but impossible to grasp. Dorothy moved to her armchair, the one that faced the television and had been shaped by years of her body seeking comfort, and lowered herself into it with the careful movements of someone whose heart couldn't be trusted with sudden exertion. "Marcus," Dorothy said carefully, "would you put on some tea? I think we all need something warm." It was the kind of request that wasn't really a request, and Marcus recognized his grandmother's way of buying time to process information that threatened to reshape everything she thought she knew about her dead son's life. He moved to the kitchen, but he didn't miss the way Rose was watching Dorothy, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle that had too many missing pieces. "Mrs. Williams," Rose said when Marcus was out of earshot, "your grandson has your late husband's eyes. And Daniel's courage." "You seem to know a lot about my family," Dorothy replied, her hands folded in her lap with the kind of stillness that suggested movement would be dangerous. "I've been watching you for months." The admission hit the small apartment like a physical force. Marcus dropped the tea kettle, and it clattered against the linoleum floor with a sound that seemed to echo forever. "Watching us?" Marcus's voice cracked on the words. "Why?" Rose turned to face him, and in the harsh light of the overhead fixture, he could see that her eyes were filled with something that looked like grief. "Because I owed your father a debt that I could never repay while he was alive. And because I needed to make sure you were safe." "Safe from what?" Dorothy's question came out as barely more than a whisper. "From the people who killed Daniel." The words fell into the room like stones into still water, creating ripples that would reach every corner of their lives. Marcus felt his knees give out, and he grabbed the counter to keep himself upright. "My father died from an IED, Marcus said, his voice hollow. "Enemy combatants." It was in the report. Rose shook her head slowly. The IED was real. But it wasn't random, and it wasn't enemy combatants who planted it. "Your father discovered something about my family, something that could have destroyed us all. When he tried to protect me, they decided he was too dangerous to live." Dorothy's hand moved to her chest, pressing against the place where her damaged heart was working too hard to keep up with the revelations that were tearing through her carefully constructed understanding of her son's death. "Dorothy," Rose said gently, "you need your medication. The metoprolol. You're supposed to take it twice a day, but you've been rationing it because the prescription costs $437 that you don't have." The silence that followed was the kind that precedes earthquakes, a holding of breath before the world changes forever. "How could you possibly know that?" Marcus's voice was barely audible. Rose reached inside her tattered coat, past layers of fabric that had been carefully arranged to hide what lay beneath. When her hand emerged, she was holding a smartphone with a cracked screen that somehow still glowed with life. "Because I know everything about both of you," she said, her fingers moving across the damaged screen with practiced ease. "I know that Marcus scored in the 98th percentile on his SATs but can't afford college. I know that you work 60 hours a week at 2 different jobs and still can't make ends meet. I know that you've been selling your grandmother's jewelry piece by piece to pay for her medication, and that you're down to your mother's wedding ring, the one you've been saving for last because you can't bear to let it go." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. The wedding ring was hidden in a shoebox under his bed. He'd never told anyone about it, not even his grandmother. Rose's fingers continued their dance across the cracked screen, and then she turned the phone toward them. The headline blazed across the display in bold letters that seemed to pulse with their own malevolent energy. Tech billionaire Rose Blackwood declared dead in private jet crash, $50 billion estate in dispute. Below the headline was a photograph that made Marcus's world stop spinning entirely. It was Rose, but not the broken woman who sat in his grandmother's living room. This was Rose Blackwood in a designer suit, standing in what looked like a boardroom full of men in expensive suits, her silver hair perfectly styled and her steel-gray eyes focused on the camera with the kind of intensity that suggested she could see through the lens and into the soul of whoever was looking back. The article was dated 3 months ago, and the subheading read, "Blackwood Industries CEO presumed dead after private jet disappears over Atlantic. Family members contest will as $50 billion estate hangs in balance." Marcus stared at the screen until the words began to blur together, and when he finally looked up, Rose was watching him with an expression that contained apology, determination, and something that looked disturbingly like love. $50 billion, Marcus whispered. "Give or take a few million," Rose replied. "Though most of it's tied up in trusts and investments that my family has been trying to break for months." Dorothy struggled to her feet, her hands still pressed against her chest. "You're telling me that you're one of the richest women in the world, and you've been living on the streets?" "I'm telling you that I'm one of the richest women in the world, and my own family tried to kill me for it." Rose's voice carried the weight of betrayal that had been festering for months. "The plane crash was supposed to be real. I was supposed to die in that wreckage, along with any inconvenient truths about how the Blackwood fortune was really built." The cracked smartphone screen flickered, and for a moment Marcus thought he saw something else in the reflection, a glimpse of the black SUV from the street, its tinted windows hiding watchers who never stopped watching. But when he looked again, there was only the article, and the photograph of a woman who had everything in the world except the one thing that money couldn't buy, the ability to trust the people who shared her blood. If you are enjoying this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 3. The silence in Dorothy's living room stretched like a taut wire, threatening to snap under the weight of revelations that had just shattered everything Marcus thought he knew about his life. Rose's cracked smartphone cast an eerie glow across her weathered features, making her look like a ghost telling stories from beyond the grave. $50 billion, Dorothy whispered, sinking deeper into her armchair. Sweet Jesus. Rose's laugh was bitter as black coffee. Money has a way of bringing out the worst in people, Mrs. Williams. Especially family. She tucked the phone back inside her coat with movements that spoke of months spent protecting the only proof of her true identity. My nephew Harrison saw an opportunity when I started showing signs of what he convinced everyone was early-onset dementia. Marcus found his voice, though it sounded foreign to his own ears. But you seem perfectly lucid to me. I am now. Rose's steel-gray eyes focused on him with laser intensity. But 18 months ago, I was experiencing memory lapses, confusion, disorientation. Classic symptoms of a rare neurological condition that runs in my family. Harrison convinced my board of directors that I was becoming mentally incompetent. He started proceedings to have me declared unfit to manage my own affairs. Dorothy leaned forward, her hands gripping the worn arms of her chair. So you faked your own death? I discovered Harrison's real plan 3 days before the competency hearing. Rose stood and moved to the window, peering through the threadbare curtains at the street below. He wasn't just trying to take control of Blackwood Industries. He was planning to have me permanently institutionalized in a private facility, one where inconvenient relatives could disappear forever. The casual way she spoke about her own family's betrayal sent ice through Marcus's veins. Your own nephew was going to have you killed? Harrison learned patience from our grandfather, who built the Blackwood fortune on other people's graves. Rose's reflection in the window looked like a woman haunting her own life. The plane crash was supposed to be my escape route. I had help from people Harrison didn't know existed, former military, intelligence operatives, people who owed favors to the old Rose Blackwood. Marcus thought of his father's photograph on the mantelpiece, the steady eyes that had watched over their family from beyond the grave. People like my father. Daniel was the architect of my escape plan. Rose turned from the window, and in the lamplight, Marcus could see tears tracking down her cheeks. He spent 2 months setting up fake identities, safe houses, extraction routes. The plan was perfect. Too perfect. A chill settled over the apartment that had nothing to do with the autumn air seeping through old windows. Dorothy's hand moved to her chest again, and Marcus recognized the gesture, his grandmother reaching for strength that her damaged heart couldn't provide. What went wrong? Dorothy asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer would destroy something precious. Someone betrayed us. Rose's words fell like stones into still water. Someone told Harrison about the fake crash before it happened. Daniel was supposed to be on that plane with me, providing security during the transition to my new identity. Instead, he got orders to deploy to Afghanistan 2 weeks early. Marcus felt the room tilt around him. That's impossible. Dad's deployment was routine military rotation. Your father wasn't regular army anymore, Marcus. He'd been working Black Ops for Blackwood Industries for 3 years. The Afghanistan deployment was supposed to be his cover story while he helped me disappear. Rose moved closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But Harrison discovered the plan. He couldn't risk Daniel exposing the truth about what the Blackwood family really does with their money. The words hung in the air like smoke, visible but impossible to grasp. Marcus tried to process what Rose was telling him, but his mind kept rejecting the implications. His father, the man who had taught him to tie his shoes and throw a baseball, had been living a double life that nobody, not even his own family, had suspected. You're saying my son was murdered, Dorothy said, and her voice carried the kind of quiet fury that Marcus had never heard from his grandmother before. I'm saying your son died protecting secrets that could bring down governments. Rose's phone buzzed against her coat, and she pulled it out quickly, her face going pale as she read whatever message had appeared on the cracked screen. What is it? Marcus asked. Rose was already moving toward the door, her movements sharp with sudden urgency. They found us. We have maybe 3 minutes before. The lights went out. Emergency lighting from the hallway cast grotesque shadows through the gap under the door, and in that dim red glow, Marcus could see Rose transforming before his eyes. Gone was the confused old woman who had sat lost in the rain. In her place stood someone who moved with military precision, someone who had spent months learning how to survive. "Dorothy, is there another way out of this building?" Rose's voice cut through the darkness with commanding authority. "Fire escape," Dorothy whispered. "Kitchen window leads to the back alley. Marcus, help your grandmother. Stay low, move fast, and whatever happens, don't look back." Rose was at the window already, her hands working the old locks with surprising expertise. "They'll come up the front stairs first, but they'll have the building surrounded within minutes." Through the thin walls of the apartment building, Marcus could hear doors slamming, heavy footsteps on the stairwell, and voices speaking in the clipped, professional tones of people who did violence for a living. "This is really happening," Marcus breathed, helping Dorothy to her feet. "This has been happening for 3 months, Rose replied grimly, forcing the kitchen window open with a squeal of old metal. "You just got caught in the crossfire." The fire escape was a skeleton of rust and broken promises, clinging to the side of the building like a metal spider web. Rose went first, testing each step before committing her weight, then helping Dorothy navigate the treacherous descent. Marcus brought up the rear, his heart hammering against his ribs as he listened for sounds of pursuit. They were 2 floors down when the apartment building's front door exploded inward with the sound of splintering wood and shouted commands. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness above them, and Marcus could hear boots on the stairs, heavy, methodical, getting closer. "Faster," Rose hissed, but Dorothy's heart medication made her movements slow and careful. Each step down the fire escape felt like an eternity. A window shattered above them, and suddenly the night was full of voices and searching lights. Marcus pressed himself against the brick wall, pulling his grandmother closer as flashlight beams swept the alley below them. "There," someone shouted. "Back fire escape." Rose dropped the last 8 feet to the alley pavement and rolled, coming up in a crouch with her arms outstretched to catch Dorothy. "Jump, Mrs. Williams. I'll catch you." Dorothy hesitated for a heartbeat, looking down at the woman who claimed to be worth $50 billion and was now covered in grime and blood from a dozen scrapes. Then boots appeared on the fire escape above them, and decision time was over. Dorothy jumped. Rose caught her with surprising strength, absorbing the impact and keeping both of them upright. Marcus followed a second later, landing hard on the broken asphalt as shouts erupted from the fire escape above. "This way," Rose commanded, leading them deeper into the maze of alleys that connected the tenement buildings like arteries in a concrete body. Behind them, Marcus could hear their pursuers navigating the fire escape with much less care for stealth. Rose moved through the urban labyrinth like she had memorized every trash bin and chain-link fence, leading them through passages that Marcus, who had lived in this neighborhood his entire life, didn't know existed. They squeezed through gaps between buildings, climbed over fences topped with razor wire, and descended into storm drains that smelled of decades of urban runoff. "How do you know these tunnels?" Marcus gasped as they splashed through ankle-deep water in what had once been part of the city's subway system. "I've been running for 3 months, Rose replied without breaking stride. "You learn the infrastructure of survival quickly when the alternative is death." The tunnel opened into a wider chamber that echoed with their footsteps and the distant sound of dripping water. Rose pulled out her phone, using its cracked screen as a flashlight to navigate the maze of pipes and abandoned maintenance equipment. "We're under the old subway line," she explained. "These tunnels connect to the current system about half a mile east. We can surface near Grand Central and disappear into the crowd." Dorothy was breathing hard, her hand pressed against her chest in the gesture that Marcus had learned to fear. "I need to rest," she whispered. Rose stopped immediately, her attention shifting from escape to concern. "How long since your last dose of metoprolol?" "This morning. But I've been rationing." "Mrs. Williams, you could have a heart attack." Rose's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. "We need to get you to a hospital." "No hospitals," Dorothy said firmly. "They'll find us there." "Then we need to get you medication, and we need to get it now." Rose pulled out her phone again, scrolling through what looked like an encrypted contact list. "I have resources," but using them means revealing our location to people who may not all be trustworthy. Marcus looked from his grandmother's pale face to Rose's grim expression, and suddenly the weight of their situation crashed down on him like a falling building. They were fugitives now, running from people with enough power to fake plane crashes and murder American soldiers. His grandmother was having a medical crisis, and their only ally was a dead billionaire who had been living in tunnels for 3 months. "Rose," he said quietly, "I need to understand something. You said my father discovered your family's plan to have you killed. But if he was working for you, why was he deployed to Afghanistan? Why was he really there?" Rose's fingers stopped moving across her phone screen. In the dim light reflected from the cracked display, her face looked carved from stone. "Your father didn't die in Afghanistan, Marcus." The words echoed through the tunnel like a gunshot, and Marcus felt his knees go weak. "That's impossible. We got the death notification. There was a funeral. A flag. Your father died in a warehouse in Brooklyn 3 days before his scheduled deployment." Rose's voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the weight of guilt and grief beneath her controlled delivery. "He was my head of security, and he discovered something about my family that they couldn't allow him to live to expose." Dorothy made a sound that was part gasp, part sob, and Marcus reached for her automatically, his mind reeling with implications that threatened to tear apart everything he had believed about his father's sacrifice. The army records, the casualty reports, the story about the IED, all of it was fabricated to cover up the real reason Daniel Williams had to die. Rose's steel-gray eyes met Marcus's in the ghostly light of her phone screen. "My family had him killed because he discovered their plan to murder me. And then they sent his body to Afghanistan to make it look like he died serving his country instead of serving the truth." If you are enjoying this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 4. The tunnel echoed with the sound of Dorothy's ragged breathing and the distant drip of water that had been falling in the same rhythm for decades. Marcus stared at Rose in the ghostly light of her cracked phone screen, her words about his father's real death reverberating through his skull like the aftershock of an explosion. "You're lying." The words came out of Marcus's mouth before he could stop them, desperate and raw. "My father died serving his country. He was a hero." "He was a hero," Rose said quietly. "Just not the kind the army writes citations for." Dorothy's hand found Marcus's arm, her grip weak but insistent. "Baby, let her talk. I think I always knew something wasn't right about Daniel's death." Rose moved closer, her movements careful in the confined space of the tunnel. "Mrs. Williams, did your son ever tell you about his mother?" The question hung in the air like smoke, and Marcus saw his grandmother's face change in the dim light. A lifetime of carefully buried secrets seemed to surface in her expression, knowledge she had carried alone for decades. "He said she died when he was young," Dorothy whispered. "Said she was from a wealthy family that never accepted him." "She didn't die." Rose's voice carried the weight of confessions that had been 20 years in the making. "She gave him up because she was 17 years old and unmarried, and her father threatened to disown her if she kept the baby." Marcus felt the world tilt around him, reality shifting like sand beneath his feet. "What are you saying?" Rose reached into her coat and pulled out a small photograph, its edges worn smooth by years of handling. Even in the poor light, Marcus could see it clearly, a teenage girl with steel-gray eyes and silver blonde hair, holding a baby whose features would grow into the face Marcus had inherited from his father. "I was 17 when I gave birth to Daniel," Rose said simply. "I've regretted that decision every day for the past 43 years." The silence that followed was the kind that precedes earthquakes, a moment when the earth holds its breath before everything changes forever. Marcus stared at the photograph, seeing his father's infant face, his own eyes reflected in the girl who would become one of the richest women in the world. "You're my grandmother," Marcus breathed. "I'm your grandmother who gave away her son and spent 4 decades trying to make up for it." Rose's voice cracked on the words. "Every scholarship you received, every medical bill that mysteriously got paid, every time your family got an anonymous donation just when things were at their worst, that was me, Marcus. That was my guilt trying to buy back the love I threw away." Dorothy's sob echoed through the tunnel, a sound of grief and recognition that cut through Marcus like a blade. The electric bills that got paid when I couldn't work after my heart attack. The groceries that appeared on our doorstep. The way Marcus's school fees always seemed to get handled by clerical errors in the financial aid office. All of it, Rose confirmed. I'd been watching over this family from the shadows for 20 years, trying to protect you from the consequences of choices I made when I was barely older than Marcus is now. Marcus felt his legs give out, and he slumped against the tunnel wall as the full weight of Rose's revelation crashed down on him. His entire life had been a lie, not a cruel deception, but a desperate attempt by a woman to care for the family she had abandoned. Why didn't you ever tell us? Marcus's voice was barely audible above the sound of dripping water. Because I was a coward. Rose's admission came out like a physical pain. And because I knew that if my family ever discovered Daniel was my son, they would use him to control me. Or worse, they would eliminate him as a threat to their plans. But they did eliminate him, Dorothy said, her voice sharp with decades of suppressed anger. They killed him anyway. Yes. Rose's phone buzzed again, and she glanced at the screen with growing alarm. And now they're coming for the rest of my family. The sound of boots on metal echoed through the tunnel system, distant but getting closer. Rose's head snapped up, her expression shifting from grief to the cold calculation of someone who had been running for her life for 3 months. We need to move. Now. She led them deeper into the labyrinth of abandoned tunnels, following a path that seemed burned into her memory. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, multiple sets of footsteps, radio chatter, the systematic search of people who had unlimited resources and no regard for collateral damage. There's a warehouse district about half a mile ahead, Rose whispered as they climbed a rusted ladder that led toward street level. Abandoned buildings, multiple exit routes. We can lose them there. They emerged from a storm drain into an industrial wasteland that looked like the skeleton of America's manufacturing past, empty factories and warehouses stretching toward a horizon painted in shades of urban decay. Rose led them through the maze of abandoned buildings, her phone's GPS guiding them toward a destination that existed only in the digital underground she had learned to navigate. The warehouse she chose looked like all the others from the outside, broken windows, graffiti-covered walls, and the kind of emptiness that suggested dreams had come here to die. But inside, it had been converted into something that resembled a command center, computer equipment covered by tarps, supplies stockpiled in corners, and maps of the city marked with escape routes and safe houses. You've been living here, Marcus realized. One of several places. Rose moved to a wall safe hidden behind a loose panel, her fingers working a combination that opened with a soft click. I've spent 3 months preparing for the possibility that they would find me. She pulled out a laptop, several phones, and what looked like enough cash to fund a small war. But it was the final item that made Marcus's blood run cold, a pistol that Rose handled with the familiarity of someone who had learned to sleep with death as a constant companion. Rose, Dorothy said carefully, what exactly are you planning to do? I'm planning to end this. Rose's voice carried the finality of someone who had run out of places to hide. Harrison has been systematically eliminating everyone who could challenge my death. Former employees who knew too much, investigators who asked the wrong questions, military personnel who helped with my escape plan. I won't let him add you to that list. The warehouse's main door exploded inward with the sound of breaching charges, and suddenly the space was filled with tactical lights and the laser sights of assault rifles. Men in black gear poured through the opening like a tide of controlled violence, moving with the precision of a military operation. Rose Blackwood, a voice called out from behind the assault team. Or should I say, the late Rose Blackwood? The man who stepped into the light was everything Marcus had expected and nothing he had prepared for. Harrison Blackwood wore an expensive suit that somehow made him look more dangerous than any tactical gear could have managed. He was perhaps 45, with the kind of predatory handsomeness that suggested he had never been told no by anyone who expected to live long enough to regret it. Hello, Harrison, Rose said calmly, the pistol in her hand steady despite the odds. You look well. Murder agrees with you. Harrison's smile was the kind that belonged in boardrooms where people's lives were bought and sold like commodities. Aunt Rose. You've been quite difficult to find. But then, you always were the stubborn one in the family. I learned from the best, Rose replied. Your grandfather taught me that sometimes the only way to deal with a rabid dog is to put it down. How poetic. Harrison gestured, and his men spread out in a semicircle, their weapons trained on the three fugitives. Unfortunately, you're outnumbered and outgunned. And more importantly, you're legally dead. Even if you kill me, no one will believe that Rose Blackwood came back from the grave to commit murder. Marcus stepped forward, his teenage bravado warring with the terror that threatened to freeze his blood. What do you want? Harrison's attention shifted to him, and Marcus felt like he was being examined by a scientist who was deciding which vivisection technique would be most educational. Marcus Williams. 17 years old, honor student, athlete, devoted grandson. Harrison's voice carried the casual menace of someone reading from a grocery list. Also, unfortunately, the illegitimate great-grandson of Augustus Blackwood and a potential claimant to the family fortune. I don't want your money, Marcus said, surprised by the strength in his own voice. Of course you don't. But the law doesn't care what you want. It cares about bloodlines and inheritance rights. Harrison moved closer, his hands clasped behind his back like a professor delivering a lecture. As long as you exist, Marcus, there's a possibility that someone might challenge Rose's death certificate. Someone might start asking questions about where all that money really came from. Rose raised her pistol, but Harrison's men were faster. Red laser dots danced across her chest like malevolent fireflies. I've spent 18 months cleaning up loose ends, Harrison continued conversationally. Military personnel who helped with the fake crash. Financial advisors who helped move Rose's money. A certain army sergeant who discovered our family's real business model. Daniel, Dorothy whispered. Sergeant Williams was quite resourceful. It took considerable effort to arrange his death in a way that looked like enemy action. Harrison's smile never wavered. But then, we Blackwoods have always been creative when it comes to eliminating obstacles. Marcus felt rage building in his chest like a physical fire. You murdered my father for money. I murdered your father because he was going to expose a network that's taken 3 generations to build. Harrison's mask slipped for a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath the surface charm. The Blackwood fortune wasn't built on technology, Marcus. It was built on human trafficking, weapons smuggling, and information brokerage. Your father was going to destroy an empire. The admission hung in the air like a confession that damned them all. Rose's finger tightened on her pistol's trigger, but she was still outnumbered 10-1. So what happens now? Rose asked. Now you die. Again. But this time, it will be permanent. Harrison nodded to his men. And this time, there won't be any inconvenient relatives left to ask uncomfortable questions. The shot came without warning, a sound like thunder in the enclosed space of the warehouse. Marcus saw Rose stagger, saw the spreading red stain across her chest, saw her falling toward the concrete floor in what seemed like slow motion. But even as she fell, Rose's hand was moving, reaching into her coat for something that she pressed into Marcus's palm with the last of her strength. The real fortune, she gasped, her steel-gray eyes fixing on his face with desperate intensity, isn't money. The USB drive felt warm in Marcus's hand as Rose's eyes closed and her breathing stopped. Around them, Harrison's men were already moving to secure the scene, but Marcus was focused only on the small device that his dying grandmother had entrusted to him. A fortune that wasn't money. A legacy written in blood and buried in the digital underground. And the terrible knowledge that the war for the Blackwood Empire had only just begun. If you are enjoying this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 5. The silence in the warehouse was broken only by the sound of Harrison's expensive shoes clicking against concrete as he approached Rose's motionless form. Marcus clutched the USB drive in his palm, the small device feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds as he watched his newly discovered grandmother's blood pool beneath her body. Clean this up, Harrison commanded his men, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone who had ordered deaths before. Make it look like a homeless encampment fire. No one investigates those anymore. One of the tactical team members knelt beside Rose's body, reaching for her pulse point with practiced efficiency. His fingers had barely touched her throat when Rose's eyes snapped open and her hand clamped around his wrist with surprising strength. "Surprise," she whispered. The man tried to pull away, but Rose's grip was like iron. With her free hand, she ripped open her coat to reveal the Kevlar vest underneath, its surface dented where Harrison's bullet had struck but intact enough to save her life. "Kevlar," she said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "A girl's best friend when she's being hunted by family." The warehouse erupted into chaos. Harrison's men swung their weapons toward Rose, but she was already moving, using the kneeling operative as a human shield while her other hand found the pistol she had dropped when the bullet's impact knocked her down. "Marcus, Dorothy, down." Rose's command cut through the confusion like a blade. Marcus grabbed his grandmother and pulled her behind a stack of shipping crates as gunfire erupted around them. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, automatic weapons chattering in controlled bursts while Rose returned fire with surgical precision that spoke of training far beyond what any corporate executive should possess. "How?" Harrison's voice carried equal parts rage and disbelief. 20 years of preparing for this moment," Rose called back, using the industrial equipment as cover while she moved through the warehouse like a ghost. "Did you really think I'd spend 3 months running without learning how to fight back?" Marcus peered around the edge of their makeshift shelter and saw Rose moving with the fluid grace of someone half her age, each shot she fired finding its target with deadly accuracy. But she was still outnumbered, and Harrison's men were beginning to coordinate their attack. "The USB," Dorothy whispered urgently. "What's on it?" Marcus looked down at the device in his hand, its innocuous black surface giving no hint of the secrets it contained. "She said the real fortune isn't money." "Then what is it?" Before Marcus could answer, Rose appeared beside them, moving with such stealth that he nearly cried out in surprise. Her face was pale, and there was blood trickling from a cut on her forehead, but her eyes were sharp with the kind of focus that had kept her alive for 3 months. "We need to get out of here," she said simply. "Now." She led them toward the back of the warehouse, where a loading dock offered access to an alley that connected to the maze of abandoned buildings. Behind them, Harrison was shouting orders to his men, his voice tight with the frustration of someone who had just watched a carefully orchestrated execution turn into a catastrophe. "Move, move, move." Harrison's voice echoed through the warehouse. "She can't have gotten far." They reached Rose's hidden motorcycle, a black machine that looked like it had been designed for urban warfare, just as Harrison's men burst through the loading dock behind them. Rose kicked the engine to life, its roar drowning out the sound of approaching footsteps. "Get on," she commanded. It wasn't until they were racing through the industrial district, Dorothy clinging to Marcus while he held tight to Rose's waist, that Marcus found his voice again. "The bulletproof vest," he shouted over the engine noise. "How did you know to wear it?" "I've been expecting Harrison to find me for weeks," Rose called back. "When you're worth what I'm worth, paranoia isn't a character flaw, it's a survival skill." They rode through the city for 20 minutes, following a route that seemed random but was clearly planned down to the last turn. Finally, Rose pulled into the underground garage of what looked like another abandoned building but turned out to be equipped with security systems that belonged in a government facility. "Welcome to my real safe house," Rose said as steel doors closed behind them. The elevator that carried them to the top floor required both a keycard and a biometric scan, and when the doors opened, Marcus found himself in an apartment that looked like it had been transplanted from a luxury hotel. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, while computer equipment that probably cost more than most people's houses hummed quietly in the background. "This is where you've really been living," Dorothy said, sinking into a chair that probably cost more than their monthly rent. "One of several places." Rose moved to a wall safe that opened with her handprint, revealing stacks of cash, multiple passports, and a laptop that looked like it had been designed by NASA. "I've spent 3 months setting up contingencies for every possible scenario." She powered up the laptop and plugged in the USB drive that Marcus had been clutching like a lifeline. The screen filled with data that scrolled too fast for him to follow, numbers, codes, and what looked like financial records from banks he had never heard of. $237 billion, Rose said quietly. The number hung in the air like something that existed outside the normal rules of mathematics. Marcus tried to process what she had just said, but his mind kept rejecting the implications. That's impossible, he breathed. Digital currency, cryptocurrency, blockchain assets distributed across 700 different wallets in 43 countries. Rose's fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced ease. Money that exists only in the digital realm, untraceable by any government, inaccessible to any court order. Dorothy leaned forward, her hand pressed against her chest in the gesture Marcus had learned to fear. You've been hiding $250 billion? I've been building it for 20 years, Rose replied. Every dirty transaction the Blackwood family made, every arms deal and human trafficking operation, every government bribe and corporate extortion, I skimmed a percentage and converted it to digital currency. Marcus stared at the screen, watching numbers that represented more wealth than entire nations possessed. You've been stealing from your own family? I've been building evidence. Rose's voice carried the weight of decades spent planning for this moment. Every transaction in this system is tied to a specific crime, a particular victim, a documented atrocity. This isn't just money, Marcus. It's a complete record of everything the Blackwood family has done for the past 2 decades. The laptop beeped, and a message appeared on the screen: biometric verification required. Rose placed her hand on a scanner that had emerged from the side of the device, and Marcus watched as green light played across her palm. First authorization confirmed. Blood relative verification required. Your turn, Rose said, gesturing toward the scanner. Marcus hesitated. What happens when I put my hand on that thing? We gain access to enough evidence to destroy the Blackwood Empire and enough money to rebuild everything they've torn down. Rose's steel-gray eyes met his. Or we do nothing, and Harrison continues to use the family fortune to fund human trafficking networks across 3 continents. Marcus placed his hand on the scanner. The green light felt warm against his skin, and the device hummed as it analyzed his DNA, compared it to samples stored in its memory, and confirmed what Rose had told him in the tunnel. He was Augustus Blackwood's great-great-grandson, heir to a legacy built on other people's suffering. Access granted. Digital Empire initialization complete. The screen filled with maps, financial networks, and data streams that represented power beyond anything Marcus had ever imagined. But as he watched the information flow across the display, he noticed something else. Rose's hands were shaking. Rose? Dorothy's voice carried the concern of someone who recognized the signs of medical distress. Rose closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, Marcus saw something there that made his blood run cold. Confusion. Disorientation. The same lost expression he had seen on her face when she sat in the rain, calling for help that no one seemed to hear. The memory lapses, Rose said quietly. The confusion, the disorientation that Harrison used to have me declared mentally incompetent. It wasn't an act. Marcus felt the world tilt around him again. What are you saying? I'm saying I have Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. A rare, degenerative brain condition that runs in the Blackwood family. Rose's voice was steady, but Marcus could see the effort it took to maintain that control. I'm dying, Marcus. The confused old woman act was only half an act. I have weeks, maybe a month before the disease progresses to the point where I won't be able to function. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of Dorothy's sharp intake of breath. Sweet Jesus. The vault can only be accessed with biometric scans from both of us, Rose continued, her voice growing weaker. When I die, you'll be the only person left who can use this information to stop Harrison and expose what the Blackwood family really is. Marcus stared at the screen, at the $250 billion digital empire that now hung around his neck like a millstone. I don't know how to do any of this. I'm 17 years old. You'll learn, Rose said simply. You'll have to. The laptop chimed with an incoming message, and Rose's face went white as she read what appeared on the screen. It was a video call request from an encrypted number, and when she accepted it, Harrison's face filled the display. But Harrison wasn't alone. Behind him, tied to a chair in what looked like another warehouse, was Dorothy Williams, not the Dorothy who sat beside Marcus in the safe house, but another woman entirely. Marcus's eyes moved from the screen to his grandmother beside him, and the horrible truth crashed down on him like a collapsing building. "Hello, Rose," Harrison said pleasantly. "I believe you have something that belongs to me. And I have something that belongs to Marcus." On the screen, the bound woman raised her head, and Marcus saw that it was indeed his grandmother, the real Dorothy Williams, whose place had been taken by someone who had been playing a role for the past several hours. "Who are you?" Marcus whispered to the woman beside him. The fake Dorothy smiled, and when she spoke, her voice carried a slight accent that Marcus had never noticed before. "Someone who's been waiting 3 months for Harrison to make his move." On the screen, Harrison's smile was the kind that belonged in nightmares. "The trade is simple, Rose. Transfer legal control of Blackwood Industries to me, along with access codes to your digital empire, and Mrs. Williams lives to see another day. Refuse, and she becomes another casualty in our family's long war." Rose's hand moved toward the laptop's keyboard, but the fake Dorothy caught her wrist. "Think carefully," the imposter said. "Once you give him what he wants, he'll kill all of us anyway. This isn't about money anymore. This is about eliminating every witness to what the Blackwood family really is." Marcus looked from the screen to Rose to the woman who had been masquerading as his grandmother, and realized that the game they were playing had rules he didn't understand and stakes that went far beyond anything he had imagined. The real Dorothy Williams was about to die, and the only way to save her might be to hand over a digital empire that could reshape the global balance of power. Or destroy it completely. If you are enjoying this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 6. The woman who had been masquerading as Dorothy Williams moved through Rose's safe house with the fluid grace of a professional, her earlier performance as a frail grandmother replaced by movements that spoke of military training and years spent in shadows. "My name is Agent Sarah Chen," she said, her voice now carrying a slight British accent that Marcus realized had been carefully hidden for hours. "Me 6. I've been tracking the Blackwood network for 18 months. Marcus stared at her in disbelief. "You're a spy." "I'm an intelligence operative investigating one of the largest human trafficking rings in the world," Chen replied matter-of-factly. "Rose contacted my superiors 3 months ago with an offer to provide evidence in exchange for protection. When Harrison made his move tonight, we activated the contingency plan." Rose was studying the video feed of the real Dorothy, her face pale with pain and the effort of maintaining focus despite the disease eating away at her brain. "How long do we have?" "Harrison will expect an answer within 6 hours, Chen said, consulting a device that looked like a smartphone but was clearly something far more sophisticated. "After that, he'll assume we're stalling and start removing fingers to encourage cooperation." The casual way she spoke about torture made Marcus's stomach twist, but it was Rose's reaction that truly frightened him. She was nodding as if this was just another variable in a complex equation, her steel-gray eyes calculating odds and alternatives with the cold efficiency of someone who had learned to think in terms of acceptable losses. "The Blackwood estate," Rose said finally. "Harrison will have taken her there. It's the most secure location he controls, and it sends a message about family and inheritance." Marcus had never heard of the Blackwood estate, but Chen was already pulling up satellite images on her device. The mansion that appeared on the screen looked like something from a Gothic novel. 40 rooms spread across grounds that covered nearly 100 acres, surrounded by walls that belonged in a medieval fortress. 27 security cameras, motion sensors on the perimeter, armed guards in rotating shifts, Chen recited. "It's not impregnable, but it's close." "Good thing I've been preparing for this possibility," Rose said quietly. She moved to another wall safe, this one requiring both her handprint and a retinal scan. When it opened, Marcus saw equipment that looked like it belonged in a spy movie: night vision goggles, communications gear, and what appeared to be a small arsenal of weapons designed for stealth operations. "Rose," Marcus said slowly, "how do you have all this?" "Because I've been planning this war for 20 years. Rose pulled out a tablet that was connected to a network Marcus couldn't identify. "When you're gathering evidence against your own family, you learn to think like the enemy. Harrison has been preparing to eliminate threats to his power. I've been preparing to eliminate Harrison." The tablet screen filled with architectural plans, security protocols, and what looked like real-time surveillance feeds from inside the Blackwood mansion. Marcus watched his grandmother, his real grandmother, sitting tied to a chair in what appeared to be the estate's library, surrounded by first-edition books that probably cost more than most people's houses. "How are you accessing their security system?" Chen asked, and there was professional admiration in her voice. "I designed it," Rose replied simply. 20 years ago, when Harrison was still a college student more interested in fraternity parties than family business. Every system in that house reports to servers that I built, using software that I wrote. Marcus stared at the surveillance feeds, watching armed men patrol corridors lined with artwork that belonged in museums. "You're saying you've had access to Harrison's security system this entire time?" "I'm saying I've been watching my family prepare for war while I prepared for the same war from the other side." Rose's fingers moved across the tablet with practiced ease, and Marcus watched as security cameras throughout the mansion began to malfunction one by one. "The question isn't whether we can get into the estate. The question is whether you're ready for what we'll find when we do." "What do you mean?" Rose showed him another screen, financial records that scrolled past too quickly for him to follow, but he caught enough to make his blood run cold. Medical facilities in countries where regulations didn't exist. Shipping companies that moved cargo without questions. Front organizations that existed only on paper but transferred millions of dollars every month. "Harrison isn't just stealing the family fortune," Rose said quietly. "He's been using it to fund operations that make our weapons deals look like charity work. Human trafficking, organ harvesting, pharmaceutical experimentation on unwilling subjects." The Blackwood name has become synonymous with every form of human exploitation that money can buy. Chen was studying the financial data with the intensity of someone who had been hunting these crimes for years. "The medical facilities in Southeast Asia. We've been trying to locate them for months." "Rose's charity work," Marcus said, the pieces clicking together in his mind. "The hospitals and clinics she's been funding have been laundering money for Harrison's operations without my knowledge," Rose finished. "Every donation I made to help people was actually funding the infrastructure to hurt them. Harrison has been using my guilt about abandoning Daniel to turn me into an unwitting accomplice to atrocities." The weight of that revelation settled over the room like a toxic cloud. Marcus looked at Rose, his grandmother, the woman who had spent decades trying to make up for giving away her son, and saw the kind of pain that went deeper than any physical disease. "How long have you known?" he asked. 3 weeks. Rose's voice was barely audible. "I discovered the truth when I started investigating Harrison's real activities. Every good thing I thought I was doing, every life I thought I was saving, was actually making it easier for him to destroy other lives." Marcus felt anger building in his chest like a physical fire. "Then we stop him. Tonight." "Marcus," Chen said carefully, "this isn't a video game. Harrison's estate is defended by people who kill for a living. You're 17 years old. I'm 17 years old, and I'm apparently the only person left who can access a $250 billion digital empire." Marcus moved to Rose's equipment cache, his hands steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. "More importantly, Harrison has my grandmother, and he's using money that should belong to victims of his crimes to fund more crimes." Rose studied him with an expression that mixed pride with terror. "Marcus, there's something else you need to know before you make this decision." She activated another program on her tablet, and the screen filled with training records, medical files, and what looked like school transcripts that Marcus had never seen before. "The military training you received in JROTC wasn't standard curriculum," Rose said. "I arranged for you to be taught by instructors with special forces backgrounds. The computer programming classes you took online were designed by former NSA analysts. The parkour lessons you thought were just for fun were actually tactical movement training." Marcus stared at the records, seeing his own life laid out as a carefully orchestrated preparation for a war he hadn't known he was being trained to fight. "You've been preparing me for this," he said. "I've been preparing you for the possibility that I might not be able to protect you forever." Rose's voice carried the weight of years spent planning for her own death. "Everything you've learned, every skill you've developed, was chosen because I knew that someday you might need to fight the Blackwood family to survive." Chen was examining Rose's equipment with professional interest. Surveillance drones, jamming devices, explosive charges designed to look like everyday objects. "This is military-grade hardware." It's what Marcus will need to infiltrate the estate and extract his grandmother before Harrison realizes he's been outmaneuvered. Rose handed Marcus a communications headset that looked like it had been designed for special operations. I'll guide you through the security systems remotely, but once you're inside, you'll be on your own. Marcus clipped the headset into place and tested the connection. Rose's voice came through clearly, but he could hear the strain of her illness making it harder for her to maintain focus. The estate has 3 main vulnerabilities, Rose said, highlighting areas on the mansion's blueprint. The old servants' quarters have a ventilation system that connects to the main house. The library where they're holding Dorothy has windows that don't show up on the motion sensor grid. And Harrison always keeps a helicopter on the grounds for quick evacuations. If we can access it, we can leave the same way he would. Marcus studied the plans, his mind automatically calculating routes and timing the way his training had taught him. How long before your disease makes it impossible for you to provide remote support? Long enough, Rose said, but Marcus could see the uncertainty in her eyes. The drive to the Blackwood estate took 45 minutes through countryside that grew more isolated with each mile. Marcus rode in the back of Chen's unmarked vehicle, surrounded by equipment that would either save his grandmother's life or get them all killed in the attempt. The mansion appeared through the trees like something from a nightmare, all Gothic towers and gargoyles, surrounded by walls topped with razor wire and guarded by men who carried weapons openly. Marcus used night vision binoculars to study the patrol patterns, timing the gaps between guards and identifying the vulnerabilities that Rose had predicted. I count 12 exterior guards, he whispered into his headset. Confirmed, Rose's voice crackled back. Interior security is lighter, Harrison's overconfident about his perimeter defenses. Marcus deployed the first drone, a device no larger than a dragonfly that could slip through security nets designed to stop larger aircraft. Through its camera feed, he watched the interior of the mansion come to life on his tablet screen. The reality was worse than the financial records had suggested. Rose, Marcus whispered, his voice tight with horror. There are medical facilities in the basement. Operating rooms. And... Christ, there are people in cages. Rose's silence stretched long enough that Marcus thought he had lost the connection. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone whose worst fears had just been confirmed. Harrison isn't just funding human trafficking operations, she said quietly. He's running them from the family estate. The Blackwood mansion has become a processing center for everything we've been trying to stop. Marcus moved through the ventilation system with the fluid grace that years of parkour training had developed, the drone reconnaissance allowing him to avoid guards and security cameras with surgical precision. But it was what he discovered in the mansion's hidden areas that made his blood run cold. Medical records showed dozens of victims. Financial documents detailed organ sales to buyers in countries where questions weren't asked. And shipping manifests revealed a network that spanned continents, all of it coordinated from the library where his grandmother was being held prisoner. I'm approaching the library, Marcus whispered into his headset. Dorothy appears to be unharmed, but Harrison has 3 guards with her. Neutralize them quietly, Rose's voice instructed. If you trigger an alarm, the entire security team will converge on your position. Marcus used techniques that his JROTC instructors had taught him, moving through the shadows like a ghost and eliminating Harrison's men with efficiency that surprised him. But it was when he finally reached his grandmother that the greatest shock awaited. Marcus? Dorothy looked up as he cut her restraints, her voice carrying relief and something else that he couldn't identify. Thank God you found me. Are you hurt? Marcus helped her to her feet, scanning the library for additional threats. No, baby, I'm fine. Dorothy's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. But there's something I need to tell you before we leave this place. We need to go now, Marcus said urgently. Harrison's security will. Harrison isn't the only one who's been lying to you, Dorothy interrupted, and something in her tone made Marcus stop moving. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small vial filled with clear liquid. The medication I've been giving Rose for her heart condition. It's not heart medication, Marcus. Marcus stared at the vial, his mind struggling to process what his grandmother was telling him. It's a neurotoxin designed to accelerate the progression of degenerative brain diseases, Dorothy continued, her voice carrying the weight of confession. "I've been poisoning Rose for 6 months, speeding up her memory loss so Harrison could ever declared incompetent." The library seemed to spin around Marcus as the full scope of the betrayal crashed down on him. His grandmother, the woman he had risked everything to save, had been working with Harrison all along. Why? The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "Because Harrison promised me something Rose never could. He promised me the truth about what really happened to my son." If you are enjoying this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 7. The vial of neurotoxin fell from Dorothy's trembling hands and shattered against the library's marble floor, its contents spreading like liquid betrayal across stone that had witnessed 3 generations of Blackwood sins. Marcus stared at his grandmother, the woman who had raised him, loved him, and sacrificed everything for his future, and felt his world collapse into fragments too small to ever put back together. "You've been poisoning her," Marcus whispered, his voice hollow with disbelief. "For 6 months, you've been slowly killing her." Dorothy's tears flowed freely now, but her voice remained steady with the conviction of someone who had spent years justifying the unjustifiable. "I've been getting justice for my son." The communications headset crackled with Rose's voice, distant and distorted by the disease that Dorothy had been accelerating with every dose of poison disguised as medicine. "Marcus, get out of there. Now. Dorothy's confession means Harrison knows exactly where you are." But Marcus couldn't move. He stood frozen in the library surrounded by first-edition books and priceless artwork, staring at the woman who had taught him right from wrong while secretly orchestrating one of the most elaborate betrayals in human history. "How long?" Marcus's question came out as barely more than a whisper. "How long have I been planning this?" Dorothy wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing tears across cheeks that Marcus had kissed goodnight for 17 years. "Since the day those soldiers came to my door and told me my boy was dead." The library doors burst open, and Harrison Blackwood entered with the confident stride of someone who had just watched his carefully orchestrated plan reach its climax. Behind him came Agent Shin, except now Marcus knew she wasn't really Agent Shin, had probably never been MI6, and was almost certainly another piece in a game whose rules he was only beginning to understand. "Family reunions are so touching," Harrison said, his voice carrying the satisfied purr of a predator who had finally cornered its prey. "Though I have to admit, Mrs. Williams, your performance over the past few hours was Oscar-worthy." The concerned grandmother, the heart medication, the perfect victim waiting to be rescued. Dorothy straightened her shoulders, and suddenly Marcus could see the woman she had been before grief and revenge consumed her, strong, intelligent, capable of deceptions that spanned decades. It wasn't entirely an act. "I do love my grandson. I just love my dead son more." "Dorothy," Rose's voice came through the headset with painful clarity, "bring Marcus home. Now. Whatever Harrison promised you, whatever lies he told you about Daniel's death, you know it won't bring our boy back." Marcus pulled off the headset and held it where Dorothy could hear Rose's words. "She called him our boy," he said. "She's your family too, Graham. She's Daniel's mother. Your son's mother. She's the reason Daniel is dead," Dorothy snarled, and suddenly Marcus was seeing a side of his grandmother that had been hidden for 17 years. She abandoned him when he was a baby, threw him away like garbage because she was too much of a coward to stand up to her father. Then, when it was convenient, she decided she wanted him back. She dragged him into her world, made him part of her war, and got him killed for her secrets. Harrison moved closer, his expensive suit somehow making him look more dangerous than any tactical gear could have managed. "Mrs. Williams has been a valuable asset for the past 3 years. When Rose started her investigation into our family's business operations, Dorothy was the one who told us about it." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. 3 years. "You've been working with them for 3 years. "I've been working for justice for 3 years, Dorothy corrected. "When Harrison contacted me and told me the truth about what Rose had done to Daniel, about how she had used him and manipulated him and ultimately gotten him killed, I knew I had to do something." Marcus's mind raced through the implications. The anonymous donations. The medical bills that got paid. The scholarships. That was never Rose helping us, that was Harrison, buying your cooperation. That was me making sure my grandson had the opportunities my son never got to give him, Dorothy said fiercely. Harrison kept his promises, Marcus. Every scholarship, every medical bill, every time we needed help, he provided it. All I had to do was keep Rose distracted, keep her focused on playing the guilty grandmother while Harrison consolidated control of the family business. The family business that includes human trafficking and organ harvesting, Marcus said, his voice rising with anger. You've been helping fund slavery, Graham. You've been complicit in murder. Dorothy's face went pale, but her voice remained steady. Harrison told me Rose was lying about what the Blackwood money funded. He said she was trying to frame him for crimes she had committed herself. And you believed him? Marcus gestured toward the surveillance feed still playing on his tablet, showing the medical facilities in the mansion's basement, the caged victims, the evidence of atrocities that no amount of justification could excuse. You believed him over the evidence of your own eyes? I believed him because he gave me something Rose never could, Dorothy said quietly. He gave me someone to blame for Daniel's death. The confession hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre, and Marcus finally understood the true scope of what his grandmother had done. She hadn't just betrayed Rose, she had spent 3 years systematically destroying the life of the woman who had given birth to her beloved son, all in service of a grief that had metastasized into something monstrous. Where is Rose now? Harrison asked, his patience clearly wearing thin. Marcus's headset crackled with static, then went silent. I don't know, he lied. Harrison's smile was the kind that belonged in nightmares. Of course you do. The question is whether you'll tell me voluntarily, or whether I'll have to hurt your grandmother until you cooperate. You won't hurt Dorothy, Marcus said with more confidence than he felt. She's been working for you for 3 years. She's valuable. She was valuable when Rose was alive and accessible, Harrison corrected. Now that Rose is dying and you have access to the digital empire, Mrs. Williams has become a liability. Particularly since she knows enough about our operations to destroy us if she ever decides to develop a conscience. Dorothy's face went ashen as she realized the implications of what Harrison was saying. You promised me protection. You promised Marcus would be safe. I promised you justice for your son's death, and I delivered it, Harrison replied coldly. Rose is dying slowly and painfully, exactly as she deserves. The fact that you're having second thoughts about the methods doesn't change our arrangement. Marcus backed toward the library's windows, his mind calculating escape routes and defensive positions the way his secret training had taught him. But it was the sound of engines approaching the mansion that made everyone in the room freeze. That would be Rose, Harrison said pleasantly. I was wondering when she'd realize that her remote support had been compromised. Through the library's tall windows, Marcus could see vehicles approaching the estate, not the black SUVs of Harrison's security team, but armored trucks that looked like they belonged to a military operation. Spotlights blazed to life across the grounds, and the sound of gunfire erupted from the perimeter. She's brought friends, Marcus observed. She's brought an army, Harrison corrected, his voice tight with concern for the first time since Marcus had met him. The question is whether it's an army we can trust. The library's doors exploded inward again, but this time it wasn't Harrison's men who entered. Rose Blackwood stood in the doorway like an avenging angel, supported by 2 operatives in tactical gear who moved with the precision of Special Forces soldiers. Her face was pale with illness and exhaustion, but her steel-gray eyes burned with the intensity of someone who had finally stopped running. Hello, Harrison, she said calmly. Hello, Dorothy. Dorothy's composure finally cracked completely. Rose, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. You meant for me to die slowly and painfully while you watched, Rose replied, her voice carrying the weight of months spent discovering the true scope of Dorothy's betrayal. You meant for me to lose my mind piece by piece until I couldn't remember Daniel's face or the sound of his voice. You meant for me to die thinking I was alone in the world, with no family left to love me. I blamed you, Dorothy sobbed. I blamed you for taking him away from us. And I blamed myself, Rose said quietly. Which made it so much easier for you to destroy me. The tactical operatives had positioned themselves to cover all exits, their weapons trained on Harrison and the fake agent Shen with professional competence. But it was Rose who commanded the room, despite her obvious illness and the way she had to lean against the doorframe for support. "Marcus," Rose said, "step away from Dorothy." "She's still my grandmother," Marcus said, though he couldn't hide the pain in his voice. "She's still the woman who spent 3 years poisoning me and 6 months planning your death," Rose replied. "Harrison's plan was never to let either of us live, Marcus." Dorothy was just too blinded by grief to see it. Harrison laughed, the sound sharp and brittle in the library's acoustics. "Touching family drama, but ultimately pointless. Even if you kill me, even if you expose everything we've done, the network will continue. The Blackwood Empire is bigger than any one person." Rose reached into her coat and pulled out a device that looked like a smartphone crossed with a medical monitor. "That's where you're wrong, Harrison." The device beeped softly, and Marcus could see readouts that looked like vital signs: heart rate, blood pressure, brain activity. All of them were being transmitted in real time to servers around the world. "Dead man's switch," Rose explained, her voice growing weaker as the stress of confrontation took its toll on her diseased brain. "If my heart stops beating, if my brain activity ceases, if any number of physiological markers indicate that I'm dead or incapacitated, every piece of evidence I've gathered over the past 20 years gets released simultaneously to the FBI, Interpol, the International Criminal Court, and every major news organization in the world." Harrison's face went white. "You're bluffing." "I'm dying, Harrison. I have weeks to live, maybe less. I have nothing left to lose and everything to expose." Rose's breathing was becoming labored, and Marcus could see sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool air in the library. "The only question is whether I die naturally from Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, or whether Dorothy's poison finally does its work." Dorothy stepped forward, her hand reaching toward Rose in a gesture that might have been supplication or attack. "Rose, please. I can help you. I can." Rose's eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed. The device in her hand continued beeping, but the readouts were changing, heart rate spiking, then dropping, blood pressure fluctuating wildly. Marcus watched in horror as his grandmother's poison finally overwhelmed Rose's damaged heart, triggering the massive cardiac event that would either kill her or activate a dead man's switch that would destroy the Blackwood Empire forever. The beeping grew more frantic, more urgent, counting down the seconds until either Rose's death or the end of the world as Harrison knew it. If you are enjoying this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 8. The beeping of Rose's dead man's switch device filled the library like a countdown to apocalypse, each electronic pulse marking another second closer to either her death or the destruction of everything Harrison had built. Marcus knelt beside Rose's collapsed form, watching her vital signs fluctuate on the small screen: heart rate erratic, blood pressure dangerously low, brain activity spiking in patterns that spoke of a mind fighting desperately against its own dissolution. "How long?" Harrison's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. One of the tactical operatives checked his watch. "Based on the device parameters, if her heart stops for more than 60 seconds, the data dump initiates automatically. No way to stop it, no way to contain it." Dorothy pushed past Harrison and dropped to her knees beside Rose, her hands hovering over the woman she had been slowly killing for 6 months. "There has to be something we can do. CPR, defibrillation." "You've been poisoning her for months," Marcus said, his voice hollow with the weight of revelations that had shattered every certainty in his 17-year-old world. "Her heart can't take much more." Rose's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Marcus with effort that seemed to require every remaining ounce of her strength. "The USB drive," she whispered. "Not just money." Marcus pulled the device from his pocket, the small black rectangle feeling heavier than it had any right to. "What else is on here?" "Everything." Rose's voice was barely audible above the frantic beeping of her monitoring device. 20 years of documentation. Every crime, every conspiracy, every dirty secret that keeps the world's monsters in power. Harrison moved closer, his expensive suit now wrinkled and stained with sweat. "She's delirious. The brain disease, the stress. I'm not delirious, Rose interrupted, her steel-gray eyes sharpening with momentary clarity. I'm dying, but I'm not crazy. Marcus, the Blackwood fortune was never about money. It was about access. About being able to move through the world's most exclusive circles and document the crimes that happen in the shadows. Marcus felt the ground shift beneath him again, reality rearranging itself around a truth that made everything else look like a footnote. You're saying you've been working undercover for 20 years? I'm saying I've been gathering evidence for 20 years, Rose replied, her breathing becoming more labored. Every arms deal, every human trafficking network, every politician who sells votes for cryptocurrency, every judge who takes bribes to look the other way. It's all there, Marcus. All of it. The tactical operatives exchanged glances, and Marcus realized they weren't Harrison's men or random mercenaries. They moved with the discipline of federal agents, people who had been waiting for this moment as long as Rose had been planning for it. FBI, one of them confirmed, showing a badge that gleamed under the library's chandelier. We've been working with Rose for 3 years, ever since she first approached us about the Blackwood network. Dorothy's face crumpled with the weight of understanding. She wasn't the criminal. We were. You were the criminals, the FBI agent corrected. Rose was the one trying to stop you. Harrison's composure finally cracked completely. This is impossible. Rose is dying of a brain disease. She's been confused, disoriented. The early stages of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease can actually enhance certain cognitive functions, Rose said, her voice gaining strength from some final reserve of will. Pattern recognition, memory consolidation, the ability to see connections that others miss. I've been using my illness as cover while I documented everything your family has done for the past 2 decades. Marcus looked at the USB drive in his hand, then at the woman who had given birth to his father, who had spent 40 years trying to make up for abandoning her son, who had turned her guilt and grief into a weapon against the very system that had corrupted her family. The $250 billion, he said slowly. It's all evidence. It's all stolen money that I've been tracking back to its sources, Rose confirmed. Every cryptocurrency wallet, every digital transaction, every shell company transfer. When that data gets released, it won't just destroy the Blackwood empire, it'll bring down networks that span continents. The beeping from her device was becoming more erratic, and Marcus could see her vital signs deteriorating in real time. Whatever time they had left was measured in heartbeats, not minutes. Marcus, Rose said urgently, you have a choice to make. You can save my life, use the emergency medication in my coat pocket, help me stabilize long enough for medical treatment. But if you do that, you become the guardian of secrets that governments would kill to suppress. You inherit a war that's been going on since before you were born. Marcus found the medication she was talking about, an auto-injector that looked like something designed for emergency cardiac events. But his hand hesitated over the device as the full implications of Rose's offer sank in. What happens if I don't? He asked quietly. I die, the dead man's switch activates, and every piece of evidence I've gathered gets released simultaneously to law enforcement agencies and media outlets around the world, Rose replied. Justice gets served, but you get to walk away. You get to be a normal 17-year-old whose biggest worry is college applications. Harrison was backing toward the library's windows, his eyes wild with the desperation of someone watching his empire crumble. You can't be serious. You destroy decades of carefully built networks, bring down people in the highest levels of government. People who deserve to be brought down, Rose said simply. Marcus looked at his grandmother, Dorothy, the woman who had raised him with love and lies in equal measure, and saw his own future reflected in her tear-stained face. She had chosen revenge over justice, grief over truth, and it had turned her into someone he no longer recognized. What kind of life would I have? Marcus asked. If I save you, if I take on this responsibility? Rose's smile was sad but genuine. The kind of life your father would have chosen. The kind that matters. Marcus activated the auto-injector. The medication hit Rose's system like liquid lightning, and her vital signs immediately began to stabilize. The frantic beeping of the dead man's switch device slowed to a more measured rhythm, and color returned to her pale cheeks. But even as Rose's life signs improved, Marcus could feel the weight of his choice settling around him like a cloak he would never be able to remove. The USB drive in his pocket contained enough secrets to topple governments, and he was now the only person alive who could access them. Harrison Blackwood, the FBI agent, said formally, "You're under arrest for human trafficking, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder, and about 50 other federal crimes that we'll sort out during processing." Harrison didn't resist as they cuffed him. He seemed to understand that the game was over, that 20 years of careful planning had just been undone by a 17-year-old boy who chose to save his grandmother's life. Dorothy was crying openly now, her hands reaching toward Rose in a gesture that might have been apology or supplication. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for what I did." Rose struggled to sit up, her recovery aided by whatever military-grade stimulant had been in the auto-injector. "Dorothy, you lost your son and you needed someone to blame. I understand that. But you chose to blame the wrong person." "I know," Dorothy sobbed. "I know that now. The question is what you're going to do with that knowledge," Rose said gently. 6 months later. Marcus Williams walked through the same downtown district where he had first encountered Rose Blackwood, but everything had changed. The Blackwood trials were front-page news around the world, with Harrison and dozens of co-conspirators facing life sentences for crimes that spanned continents. Dorothy had testified for the prosecution, her cooperation earning her a reduced sentence that would keep her in federal prison for 5 years, long enough to face the consequences of her choices, short enough to hope for redemption. Rose had survived her illness long enough to see justice served, though the Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease continued its inexorable progression. She spent her remaining good days working with Marcus to understand the vast network of information he had inherited, teaching him to navigate a digital empire built on the documentation of human evil. Marcus had access to resources beyond imagination, not just the $250 billion in tracked cryptocurrency, but information networks that stretched into every corner of global power. He used them carefully, selectively, always remembering his father's example and his grandmother's final lesson about the difference between justice and revenge. The rain was falling again as Marcus hurried through the crowded street, late for a meeting with FBI analysts who were still processing evidence from Rose's files. People rushed past him with their umbrellas and expensive coats, their eyes focused on destinations that mattered only to them. That's when he saw the homeless man. He sat on the same bench where Rose had waited for someone to notice her, his expensive suit now tattered and stained, his silver hair matted with rain. People walked past him without a glance, their indifference as complete as it had been 6 months ago. But Marcus had learned to see the invisible. He stopped, studied the man's face, and recognized features that belonged in boardroom portraits and financial magazines. This was someone who should have been dead, someone whose obituary had been front-page news just weeks ago. Marcus approached the bench and extended his hand. "Need some help?" he asked. The man looked up with eyes that held the same mixture of desperation and intelligence that Marcus had seen in Rose's face that first day. "You can see me?" "I can see you," Marcus confirmed, helping the man to his feet. As they walked away together, Marcus's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from one of Rose's old contacts. "The networks are rebuilding. We have work to do." Marcus deleted the message and kept walking. He had inherited more than money or even secrets. He had inherited a war that would probably last the rest of his life. But he had also inherited the knowledge that sometimes the most powerful people in the world were the ones that nobody else bothered to see. The homeless man gripped his hand with surprising strength and whispered urgently, "They think I'm dead, but I have evidence. Financial records, communication logs, enough information to bring down networks in 12 countries." Marcus nodded, understanding flowing between them like recognition between soldiers who had fought in the same war. "I know a place where you'll be safe," he said. "And people who will want to hear what you have to say." Behind them, the city continued its relentless rhythm, millions of people pursuing their own agendas while justice and injustice played out in the spaces between their awareness and their concern. Everyone walked past the homeless man, until Marcus took his hand. He was the next piece of the puzzle. I know you enjoyed this video. Do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Share your thoughts in the comments section below, and if you feel this will be interesting to your friends and family, send this to them by hitting the share button. Thanks for watching. The end.